Test, 1, 2. Hi, Anthony. Can you hear us? Looks like it's working.
Hello, hello, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay.
All right, so
I can
here's
close.
Councilor Simmons, the time of the meeting has arrived and you have a quorum.
Anthony to make on.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I call this meeting of the Government Operations Rules and Claims Committee to order. The call meeting is to discuss the hiring of the next city manager. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 adopted by the Massachusetts General, set up Zoom teleconference for public comment. Please be aware that Zoom is being used primarily for public comment. In order to watch the meeting, please turn into channel 722 or visit the open meeting portal at the city's website. If you'd like to provide public comment, please visit the City Council section of the city's webpage. Instructions on how to sign up to speak are posted there. Once you've completed the sign up, you'll receive a link to the Zoom meeting. You'll receive a link to the Zoom meeting. We will not allow sign up for public comment after 11:30. Having read the call and the governor's executive order, I turn to you, Clerk Wilson, to call the roll.
Councilor McGovern.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Toomey.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Zondervan.
Present and audible.
Present. Councilor Simmons.
Present and audible.
There are 5 members of the committee present. I also see Vice Mayor Mallon, Councilor Nolan. I believe those are the other remaining members from the City Council present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Madam Chair, this is Dennis Carlone. I'm here as well in the Ackerman room.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Please let the record show that we have 3 members present and attending that are not members of the committee, and please note their names in the record. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The time of the meeting having arrived, I'd like to welcome everyone today to the Government Operations Rules and Claims Committee hearing. The call of this meeting, I will read again, is as follows. The Government Operations Committee will meet to discuss the hiring of the next city manager. We are now approximately 1 year out from the date at which the current city manager's contract expires. Over the course of the past 40 years, the city of Cambridge has only had 3 individuals serve in the position of city manager. Robert Healy, who served from 1981 to 2013, Richard C. Rossi, who served from 2013 to 2016 as city manager, but served a number of years in the position of assistant city manager. And then Louis A. DePasquale, who has been serving in the position of city manager since 2016. There's clearly been very little turnover in the position, and that fact underscores the need for the city to bring on an experienced consultant to help shape and guide this process so that we can be certain that we use the time in front of us as wisely as possible. This morning, we're going to be doing 2 things, perhaps 3. We are going to be hearing from Mr. Bernard Lynch of Community Paradigm Associates, who has been engaged in these kinds of searches and who has generously made time to join us to share his thoughts on how best to move forward. After we hear from Mr. Lynch, I'm going to walk the committee through a template of what a consultant-led city manager search might look like. This model this is modeled very closely on the process the city used in 2016. And while we will certainly want to tweak it to fit the needs of 2021, I believe this template does provide a solid foundation that we can build on. After walking us through that template, I will ask for feedback from the committee, and then we shall have time for public comment. First, as I said, I'd like to welcome Bernard Lynch to the committee. Mr. Lynch has more than 40 years of experience guiding cities and towns and has extensive experience in executive searches. I've met Mr. Lynch through Jeff Beckwith, who I just want to acknowledge and thank, of the Mass Municipal Association. As I was preparing to put together this process, I went to the MMA, of which we are a member, to ask, where could we find, where are some of the resources that can help guide us as we put this process together. He recommended Mr. Lynch, and I'm very glad that he did. Mr. Lynch also has served as city manager of the town of Lowell for 8 years, manager of Chelmsford for 20 years. He served as Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito's task force on local government workforce skill gaps. He's a senior fellow at the Suffolk University Moakley Center for Public Management, and he serves as an adjunct professor at both Suffolk University and the University of Massachusetts Lowell. This is just a brief snapshot of his background. I would like to welcome Mr. Lynch and have him share any opening remarks that he may have. I see Mr. Lynch. Does he have access to be seen on screen?
I do.
Very good. Great. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to help in whatever way I can. As councilors, you've indicated, I do have experience, somewhat experience with the same form of government as the city of Cambridge, having served as Lowell city manager for almost 8 years. Quite a bit of experience working with municipalities across the Commonwealth. For the past roughly 7 years, I've been working on executive recruitments for municipalities here in Massachusetts, as well as one in New Hampshire, one in Rhode Island, but helping communities place or find appropriate candidates for the positions of manager, town manager, town administrator, as well as key department heads. And I guess I'm here today to provide whatever support and advice I can as you look at your process. A couple of things I would state, though, at the outset. One is I look at these as really as opportunities. Whenever a community finds itself in a position of filling a position like this of the manager, it's really an opportunity to step back, think about what the needs are of the community, because over time, certainly the needs of communities change from one manager to the next manager. And so you may need to look at what the attributes are that you're looking for from your next set of candidates versus where you are now, because as I say, circumstances change, needs change, skills change. So I think that's a great opportunity to sort of step back and think about that. And you need to build into your process an opportunity to have stakeholder engagement, have counselors play a role in identifying what they're looking for from the next manager, as well as gain information from citizens, as well as key staff members and community leaders. So I certainly, we always encourage that in all of the searches we've done. I should have noted, we've conducted, just in terms of chief administrative, chief executive officers in municipalities, we've conducted over 60 of those over that last 5 or 6 years. So that's a process that we use quite regularly. The other point I would make, just as an opening set of comments, and then again, I'm here more to answer your questions and help whatever way I can. The other point, though, that I would make is that it is a very competitive market right now, as I think this is happening in pretty much every industry, every profession, that there is a generational shift that's been taking place as people have retired, and there isn't necessarily, in the field of municipal management, there isn't necessarily the same number of people coming up from behind to fill these types of positions. So it is very much a seller's market in terms of finding qualified candidates for these positions. I think Cambridge is in the enviable position of being recognized as a well-run community in a very attractive region, albeit with a high cost of living. But I think that it's important to recognize that you have to be aggressive in your recruitment process and to find a good pool of candidates that will meet the city's needs. Combined with that, I think, and I certainly hope that the city is thinking along these lines as well, there's a greater awareness, certainly in municipal government, the municipal management profession, that more needs to be done in terms of increasing the level of diversity in the manager field, in terms of building a greater number of women in these manager positions, and identifying and finding opportunities for more people of color. So again, that's a priority that we always place and a number of our communities place on really conducting that outreach and trying to build pools of diverse candidates. So those are just some opening comments I guess I would make that you want to think about. You want to think about the marketplace. You want to think about engaging the community. You want to think about the importance of diversity in your pool.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Let me pose a couple of questions to kind of get us started, and then I'll turn to the committee. Mr. Lynch and I have had several conversations, and so he's had the benefit of looking at some of the things that we as a council are thinking over right now. Charter change, who can participate on a committee. So drawing from some of the questions from our earlier meetings and a few other things, I'm going to just pose a few questions to ask Mr. Lynch to turn his attention to, and then I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues to see if there's something that they would like to ask in addition. So I'm gonna put the questions up before you, Mr. Lynch, and you can discuss them in whatever order you feel most comfortable. One of my questions was, Mr. Lynch, do you have any recommendation or templates for conducting this search that you might want to share with us? I do have a template that I'm going to be sharing with the council. I believe I may have shared it with you to kind of give a cursory look to. So that's one template. Is there some other ideas that you might have? You did speak about that a little bit. In the committee here, the city council, the Government Operations Committee in one of our conversations suggested that we should establish a committee of the whole in searching for the next city manager. And would you, Mr. Lynch, be willing to weigh in on why or why not we might wish to establish a committee on the whole? And one other question, just to get this conversation started, the city council as a whole is currently looking into a charter review, something we have not reviewed, undertaken in 80 years. I think in our earlier conversations, you reminded me that we were one of two cities that still have this type of charter. Wouldn't you, Mr. Lynch, be willing to weigh in on how that process might impact the city manager search? So you can take those in any way you want. The last one going forward, I will want to also just add that last night we did adopt the charter review? Yes. I think we sent a charter review order to the council, so that would look at the appointment of city boards and commissions. And one other thing that I apologize is escaping me now, but I'm sure one of my colleagues will remember what it is particularly. So if you could speak to those three items, again, just to jumpstart our conversation, and then I'll open the floor to my colleagues, members of the committee, to ask questions that they might have. So Mr. Lynch, you have the floor.
Sure. Let me start with the. I guess maybe I'll do it in the order in which you put the questions. In terms of the template, I have seen the. You did share that with me, and I think it's consistent. The template that I saw that you provided is pretty consistent with, very frankly, with the process that we use in terms of. Again, I think it's crucial for communities to really stop before the process begins and incorporate some consideration of the specific needs that the community is currently facing, as opposed to sort of the simple process of just placing an ad out there and acting as if the situation today is the same as it was in 2016, or the same it was in 2013, or the same as it was in 1981. Cambridge is in a different place. We're all in a different place, and the job responsibilities, the skills you're looking for have changed over time. And so you really should take advantage of that opportunity. you should engage with the stakeholders, the community, to think about that. I don't think that process should be drawn out, but I don't think it should be shortened too much either. You need to have that proper balance to identify those skills, those attributes, what the current challenges are, what the opportunities are that the community is facing. That's a great process to go through. It's also important for the candidates and that are looking at this position to understand what Cambridge will want, what Cambridge needs moving forward. So, in terms of your template, I think it works. I think that the process, again, should be of a reasonable length. That is, we generally, when we do searches, we generally do it over the course of about 3 to 4 months. I think that that's a reasonable amount of time to gather that information. Might take just a little bit longer given the complexity of the city of Cambridge, but I wouldn't say anything more than 18 to 20 weeks would be used in doing that process. And that process would include that early, sort of information gathering, the actual recruitment, and then the interview process that would be used by to narrow the group of candidates down to some semi-finalists, and then ultimately the finalists that would be put to the city council. And I do think that there should be, given the, again, the complexity of Cambridge, that you should have your candidates be immersed in the community for a period of time. The finalists, not all of your candidates, but just the finalists that you're looking at should come in. They should spend some time, learn about the community a little bit more, and the community learn about them in the way I believe you used the last time out or time before that. So I think that that process makes sense, and then ultimately the council making their vote. And that leads me to the question of the having the committee of the whole. I would recommend against that. The open meeting law and the public records laws of the Commonwealth are geared towards building a sense of transparency, but you also have to keep in mind the importance of building the best possible pool of candidates for the city of Cambridge and for the residents of the city. You want the best manager possible. So in order to get that, you need to have the best possible pool. And the way the open meeting law and the public records laws in Massachusetts work is anything that goes to the committee as a whole it becomes public. So your candidates who are going to be looking at this position will want to maintain some level of confidentiality, as any of us who are looking at a job would want to do. We would want to ensure that our name and our reputations aren't put out there so early if we don't necessarily have a chance at the position. So you want to focus in on maintaining that level of confidentiality for the applicants until such time as they're finalists. The open meeting law of the Commonwealth provides for that confidentiality until it goes to the entire council. And so I would recommend that you utilize a process that would incorporate some community participation, some other stakeholder participation to help narrow your field down to those finalists that are then presented to the council. That keeps the community engaged in the process, and it also maintains that confidentiality, which guarantees that your pool will be the best possible pool for the residents of the city. The third question regarding the charter review, Council, you mentioned a couple of one specific issue that you've referred off to for consideration, and that's the appointment of committees and commissions. I know under Plan E form of government, that Cambridge, Worcester, and Lowell all have, that currently rests with the manager. A change like that, I don't think that necessarily would have a huge impact on your pool. But if it's an open-ended charter review that could change the form of government to a completely different form, that could have an impact on your pool. We actually did a search for the town of Amherst back in 2016. Amherst was looking at their form of government at the time, and looking at moving from they have a town meeting form of government, obviously as a town. They had a representative town meeting, but there was some consideration of moving to a council mayor or a council manager. They had a long history of professional management in the town. That really wasn't seen by many as being the key issue. So we were able to at least offset some of the concern of the candidates that were looking at the position, that the manager position would remain intact. But I will say that there were a number of people that did not apply for the position specifically because they were concerned that it would move from a manager form to a mayor. And that would have obviously someone making a move from across the country or across the Commonwealth to that town, only to find that their position would be eliminated a year later, would discourage people from applying for the position. So it really depends upon the changes that you're looking at that would have an impact, or what level of impact they would have on the pool that you're looking to develop. Oh. Counselor, you're muted, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for answering those questions. I only brought up charter review in the context of how it may have an impact on the hiring of the city manager. I realized, and the clerk reminded me, that we should not be talking about charter review, not unless it is in the context of the search. And so I just want to remind my colleagues, if they have any questions regarding charter review, it can only be in the context of how it may impact the city manager's search. I'm going to thank you for those questions. And so what I would like now to do, the members of the committee, Councilor McGovern, Sabrina Wheeler, Councilor Toomey, and Councilor Zondervan, who are appointed members of the committee, I first open the floor to them to see if they have any questions. I'm doing this from a different screen, so I don't know who got into the queue first. Do you?
I believe it was Quentin.
All right, so I'm going to using Neil as a guide. Councilor Zondervan, followed by Sabrina Wheeler, McGovern, and then Toomey. Councilor Zondervan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thanks to Mr. Lynch for this very helpful information. First question to you, Madam Chair, that there was reference to a template. Is that available to us?
Yes, the clerk should have sent that to you. I released that to him today. So if you check your email, it will be a few minutes. We're going to get through these questions first. And so we're going to go through it step by step. I'm not requiring you to have read it and then respond. We're going to literally work through the document. Your next question, sir?
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Second, through you to Mr. Lynch, regarding the open meeting law concerns, if we had a committee of the whole, wouldn't that be potentially remedied by executive session?
Councilor, no. The council is not able to go into executive session to consider candidates. The only group that's allowed to go into executive session to consider candidates is a preliminary screening committee, which cannot include a majority of the council.
Councilor Zondervan, you have a follow-up?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's my experience that with this type of search, there would be a committee that's comprised of not just city councilors, but other people as well, and perhaps staff members and others. So when we're talking about a search committee, I don't think we are in that sense talking about just limiting it to city council, but if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Mr. Lynch, you have the floor.
Again, if the councilors, anything that goes to the councilors, you could have some communities have utilized a representative of the council or board that would sit. The challenge to that, I will say, is that in some the communities look at is that it gives a limited number, essentially 2 bites at the apple, that they get to choose the candidate, some of the finalists, and then they get to choose the successful candidate for the manager position. The screening or search committee that includes staff members as well as community leaders can do the job of narrowing it down and bringing candidates, finalists to the council at that time. That is the way that the open meeting law envisions that working. The Attorney General actually has a publication that I can see if I can track down and I can forward that on to you. But the Attorney General has issued guidance on how this should operate for the very reasons that I've stated.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Councilor Zondrian, I respectfully ask you to yield. Let's go back to Councilor Sabrina. We'll come back around. Councilor Sabrina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for putting this meeting together and for sharing the memo and helping start the conversation, which is helpful. In sort of looking through the process, and I did have a couple questions for Mr. Lynch. I don't have an issue with bringing in folks from outside to help with the search process. I think that makes a lot of sense given how much work it will be. I do have some concerns with the model that's based on the model from 2016, and I'm worried that with a traditional sort of consultant model, being overly focused on who looks good on paper and missing out on the equity piece and on the piece of how are they going to work with residents and the councilors that residents elect, which is a big part of the job of a city manager, and what the vision is as a city manager for the city, and if they're willing to commit to the things that we know that are priorities for residents and the council. I think those should be as big as pieces as, what are their qualifications and what is their resume. And we know that being overly focused on traditional qualifications tends to privilege a certain type of traditional applicant, not just in the city manager process, but in all job searches. So my concern with the model that's based on the model from 2016 is that in that search, we had no finalists who were women, no finalists who were people of color, and we've actually never had a woman or a person of color as the city manager in the more than 80-year history of Cambridge of having a city manager. So these processes, not just in Cambridge, but in elsewhere, focus on a certain type of candidate, usually candidates who have a long history in budget or administration, usually candidates who are fiscally conservative, even when there are sort of pressing equity concerns in the city. And I think it's partly for that reason that we haven't had candidates who are women or people of color as finalists or as city managers in the history of Cambridge. So I do really want to make sure with this process that we're breaking out of that mold of how the city manager process has been traditionally done. And so my question for Mr. Lynch is, can you point to a city that's done a city manager search process recently that's had a very diverse array of finalists that break out of that mold?
Mr. Lynch, you have the floor.
Sure. Let me just say, if I could, just say a couple of things. I think the process that I've described, at least that I envisioned, that I think I saw in the template, actually isn't just a, if you will, a traditional however people look on paper as being the sort of the limiting factor. That I think, again, I'll go back to it, that I think that it's important at the outset that you reach out to the community, you engage the community, as well as the other, as well as members of the governing body to identify what you're looking for. And I think the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion it can and should be part of that. Then, you certainly, there has to be some way to look at the candidates that you receive, their materials, and narrow that field down. You may end up with 50 different people that apply for this position. You may have, it may be more than that. You have to have some means of narrowing that field down to the group that are going to be interviewed. And you can have certainly diversity within that subgroup of individuals. But beyond that, then I think that the process that I would envision for the city of Cambridge is that you would in fact have the candidates engage, the finalists engage more with the community, meet the community, and see how they match up with what the goals are of the council and the community in terms of the right fit. And part of that certainly is a certain skill set, but it also would be style of problem solving, style of communication, as well as issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion that I think are very important and that should be recognized. As far as a community that has gone through a search that results in a diverse pool, the one I will tell you that comes immediately to mind is one that we're working on right now. And obviously it's a much smaller community, but the town of South Hadley tomorrow evening will interview their finalists for their town administrator position. And there's a woman of Asian American background, as well as a city manager from outside of Massachusetts that is a person of color. Those are our two finalists.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Back to you, Councilor.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I appreciate that, and appreciate there's things we can build on. And I'm sure there a lot of time and effort was put in the last search and previous searches that we can learn from. But at the end of the day, in the previous searches, we didn't have any women, we didn't have any people of color. And I think as recently as 5 years ago, when we were doing the searches, diversity, equity, the vision piece were priorities. We just didn't end up with that pool. So trying to figure out how we can improve the process and build on it this time. But the other question I had was sort of thinking about that some more, and thinking about search firms that would specialize that. And are there search firms that you could recommend today that sort of have that specialty and are headed by women or people of color, either locally or more broadly?
Well, I'm not going to make a recommendation, but there's one firm in particular that's headed by a woman. And in terms of a firm of people, a person of color, that I would have to give some more thought to. But there are certainly firms that are actually there are several that are headed up by women that would come to mind. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Councilor Wheeler, I'm going to ask you to yield the floor to go to Councilman McGovern and then to Councilor Toomey. We'll have another round and then I'll go to the non-members of the committee. So Councilor Wheeler, if you would respectfully yield the floor, I'd like to call on Councilor McGovern.
Yeah. I'm happy to.
Councilor McGovern, thank you. Councilor McGovern, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you, but I'm going to follow on this line of questions. So how have you, I've been involved in a few searches, superintendent searches, as well as the last city manager search. And it often feels like when we use search firms and even when we do national searches, we kind of end up, everyone sort of looks at the same pool of candidates, which, you know, when you're talking about city managers, I mean, look, the reality is the reality. Most of the city managers are older white men, right? So if that's all you're looking at, that's what you're going to get, right? Or for that matter, even if you're looking at assistant city managers or deputy city managers, whatever title that particular town looks at, you're pretty much talking about slightly less older white men. So, but those aren't the only people that have the skills to be a city manager, particularly when we're trying to re-envision what those skills are. So where else do you look? Like if we just get a list of people who are either current city managers or deputy city managers, that's not good enough. So where else do you look? What other professions have you looked in? What other recruitment practices have you initiated to broaden that that pool?
Well, I do think that it's useful to look outside of the normal pool of candidates. We have had in the searches we've done, you know, we do utilize the network of managers that are out there through the International City and County Management Association, through the Massachusetts Municipal Management Association, and you know there are. I'm happy to say that there are an increased number of women. I know that in our searches, I think that we're at about 40% of the searches we've done have resulted in a woman being appointed. Much smaller in terms of people, a person of color, although we have. But in terms of outside of that world, I do believe that it's useful to have someone who has a background in public management. There is a sort of a an understanding of public management and the role of citizens in the governing of their municipal organizations that I think is important, that is reflected in public management as opposed to private management. So we do reach out to institutions of higher education that have public management programs that aren't just looking at people who are city managers or town managers, but also represent the nonprofit sector, as well as sometimes other organizations, if you will, that in which public management is important. So, for instance, we've had people from the nonprofit sector. We've had people from the military that have moved into management positions, and frankly, in the case of the military, that's where we've actually seen a higher level of candidates that are people of color. So again, that can be helpful.
Excuse me, and through you, Madam Chair, my second question. You know, one of the things you talked about the process and involving the community. Given that this is, you know, we really are also thinking about sort of reimagining in some sense what this role, you know, could be. As Contra Sabrina Wheeler had mentioned, that, you know, a lot of times the managers come out of, you know, they come out of finance or they come out of more of the administration, and we're trying to think a little differently. We had talked about the possibility of doing a sort of a community conversation, visioning process, if you will, about even before we get out there and sort of talk about like what's the job description going to be, right? How's it going to change, and how do we involve the community, you know, in that job description? Have you done that kind of groundwork in communities sort of prior to actually doing the recruitment and the search, and sort of how would that work? And what are your thoughts on, you know, sort of getting, as opposed to getting the community involved once we have a pool of people, actually getting them involved earlier to say, okay, this is the kind of person we're looking for. Now let's go out and find that person. And then.
Right. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough on that. That's exactly what I was talking about in terms of the preparation work that you do ahead of time. That you don't just go out and post a position. That you actually take the time with the counselors, with the staff, and with the public. That there are listening sessions, and again, that's something that it's been a challenge over the last year, obviously, with COVID, to do the type of public engagement. We have done it. We've done it through Zoom meetings like this. We've done it through survey work. But prior to COVID, it was pretty much a standard for us. It was a standard process that we used, and other firms, I'm sure, would do the same thing, particularly if they're told to do it. That you would go out and you would hold a series of one or more meetings with the public to get their perspective on what should be looked for in the next manager. And again, that comes down to skills, attributes, and identification of the challenges that are facing the city that you want the next city manager to address. All of that goes into for us, all of that goes into a position statement, a document that we prepare that that outlines all of that ahead of time. It's an important process for the city to go through, but then it becomes a document that is used to market the position so that people understand what Cambridge will be looking for in the next city manager, and then the screening committee and the council can use that same document to assess the candidates that they see in order to identify the candidate that most closely fits what you're looking for. So you do it up front. You have to do, again, this is my opinion, you have to do it up front for the benefit of the stakeholders, which includes the residents, as well as to ensure that the ultimate choice meets the needs of the city today.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. We're going to move now to Councilor Toomey. Councilor Toomey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank Mr. Lynch for his presentation. Certainly answered a lot of the questions that I had. And, you know, when I met with the Collins Group, that was one of the areas I brought up was the city is examining whether to change the form of government to a strong mayor and not a city manager. As we're entering the search process, how would that impact the recruitment process? I mean, that's a big angle. I think as soon as we hire, and I hope we hire soon, a consultant to assist us in this process with the community and my colleagues, you know, that we impress upon that recruitment firm consultant how aggressive to be in searching for and recruiting a diverse applicant pool. I think that's extremely important. And I think one other thing, you know, I'm just sitting here thinking, you know, that right now, certainly the private sector is certainly had shown a big increase in diversifying their workforce, especially the high administrative and positions. So we're going to have a challenge competing with some of the private sector and recruiting that diverse applicant pool. That I think is going to be a challenge too. So, but I look forward to continuing the process, and I hope as soon as we can get the consultant firm on board and start meeting with the community members to get their vision of what we should be going in the next couple of years here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Toomey. I would like to go one more round with the committee, one question apiece, and then I want to then move to the members of the committee. So I see Councilor Zondervan's hand up. We can take the same order. Councilor Zondervan, Wheeler, McGovern, and Toomey. You do not have to ask a question if you do not have one, after which we will move to the non-members who will have an opportunity to ask 2 questions. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Mr. Lynch. Again, thank you for this helpful conversation. Regarding the charter review question, and purely in the context of hiring a city manager, we're certainly anticipating that this would be at minimum a 2-year process, because it would have to go to the ballot, and the minor reviews or changes that we just debated last night will be on this year's municipal ballot, but anything more substantial wouldn't be on the ballot until 2 years later. So certainly there's no guarantee in any case, whether we're doing charter review or not, that a city manager would be employed for 2 years or more. So can you speak to that a little bit more as to, how, I understand the concern, but at the same time, we're not promising anyone a lifetime appointment here. So, it doesn't feel to me like it should be that drastic a concern given that time frame.
Well, it is particularly if you're looking for someone to, and particularly given your interest in casting a wide net and ensuring that your field is diverse as possible, in all likelihood will require you to move outside of Massachusetts. It's possible. There may be someone here in Massachusetts that would fit the goals that you may have, or the community may have. But more than likely, if you're looking for someone with the appropriate skills and background, and perhaps being presenting more diversity in your field, you may have to look outside. That being the case, I understand you're not looking to offer someone a lifetime appointment, but having someone relocate for a job that is going to potentially disappear in 2 years, or be drastically different than what they initially signed on for, will cause some concerns. City managers themselves, at least members of the profession, current members of the profession, they have an ethical requirement to stay at least 2 years, and that's just generally to represent the profession properly. The goal there obviously is that you stay for a longer period of time in which you can be effective for the community that you're serving. So for a community to say we're looking at changing our form of government, it may change in 2 years, that could have a negative impact upon your search. That's all I'm saying. Now, it may be that someone is willing to do that, and they'll just. But it obviously it's not going to be as large a pool perhaps as you would otherwise have had. And you may have the perfect candidate within that fits that, but it will all likelihood be a smaller pool.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Thank you, Councilor Zondervan. I'm going to move now to Councilor Sabrina Wheeler. Please ask your single question, after which we'll move to Councilor Becker. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Simmons. Yep, a couple of the pieces that tie into the question. The one is just figuring out how to make sure all the councilors are involved in this process. It doesn't have to be a committee of the whole. It could be an ad hoc committee if not all councilors want to be deeply involved in the process. But just being conscious of the fact, I'm very grateful to be on the Government Operations Committee, but not all our councilors are, and ultimately all the councilors are going to have to vote on the manager. And so I think it makes sense to have them involved in the process as much as possible from the get-go. The other piece is that we're talking about charter review, and obviously that connects to the city manager process, as the chair mentioned. We don't have any changes yet, though, and I think it's come up quite a bit that this term, how much power that the city manager does have, and how that bumps up into the council piece, and that just really reiterates how important it is to find the right person, not just based on qualifications on paper or experience, but how they're going to work with the council and implement the vision of the city, because once they're in there, we don't have as much power to influence them right now. And then on that piece of the charter review influencing the city manager process, I think it's good to think about it and consider. I don't think we need to be too worried about it. And if there are folks who don't apply because they're worried the role could be different in a couple years, those are maybe not folks we want as a city manager. If they are applying for this and don't want any change and aren't flexible, that's maybe not the person we're looking for. So I don't think it's something we need to worry about too much, and that this could actually help find the person who's willing to be flexible and willing to work with the city and envision a new role. And I think the Collins Center sort of laid that out in their memo really nicely. And the last piece about that is the pay of this. If this were a $50,000-$60,000 per year position or piece, I'd say let's really be concerned about the changing of the role, but it actually pays quite generously of $330,000 a year. It's the highest paid municipal position in the state. I think we can get a great talent pool regardless. And I do just hope we can sort of talk about that as this process, that compensation amount, because it didn't always used to be that high. And it's not even the amount so much that I'm concerned about, but the income gap with our lowest paid full-time employees, and thinking about that gap, because there are places that try to have the highest paid employee and the lowest paid employee not be that much. And if that's raising the lowest employee, we can do that as well. The question I had was about thinking about the power of the city manager, which is a strong city manager form of government that we have right now. And in cities that have a strong mayor form of government, many of them, not all of them, have a term limit for that strong mayor. And so I'm interested in our strong city manager form of government. Are there cities that have a term limit piece? And is that something we could think about in the contract? I was curious if Mr. Lynch knew of any examples.
I've never heard of a term limited city manager. There are some old charters out there that again, this sort of goes to the city manager's code of ethics question a little bit, but there are some old charters that basically try to replicate a mayor form, where you would say that a manager has a finite term and then is eligible for reappointment. And so then a council could, at the end of, let's say, 4 years, re-advertise the position. The code of ethics enters into that a manager will not, under the code of ethics, a manager should not apply for another manager's position. So in that scenario, another manager will not apply, because essentially what's happening, if I may, when you do something like that, when you have a term of 4 years and you have to reapply, you're taking away the professionalism of the position and you're politicizing the position. Now, I'm not saying that will happen or absolutely has to happen, but it does go against the concept of a professional manager who is supposed to act without political regard in the negative sense, not the regard to the importance of community engagement through the political process, but making decisions that are politically motivated as opposed to being motivated in the best interests of the community in which you're employed. So that's something that I am aware of communities that have that type of form of term, but in terms of someone who you want to have someone that only serves a finite number of years, you can achieve that by simply changing your manager at the completion of their their contract. Or I do know that Cambridge, like Lowell and Worcester, under the Plan E form, when you're appointed manager, you're a manager until the council decides you leave or you leave on your own. And so it is indefinite. But the council always has the opportunity to make that change if they decide that they want a change in direction. I don't necessarily encourage it too often, because that has a negative then has a negative impact on the image of the city for future city managers. That if it's seen that the city turns over every 3 years, then that's problematic for the future. There are communities that have that reputation and they have trouble finding people to fill these roles. But I think there's a balance there. I think, I happen to believe that a manager should stay in place for a period of time to achieve the goals of the council and of the community. But at some point in time, it's time to go for the benefit of the city as well as the benefit of the individual. But it's as long as they're effective in carrying out the goals of the council, that's I think that's what you're trying to achieve. So I know I gave a lot more information there than you probably were looking for, but just that whole notion of terms. Again, the idea behind the professional manager form of government is to take the negative aspect of politics out of the process and ensure that the other just comment I'll make, and I just want to throw this in because it sort of relates to a couple of the other questions that we've had, particularly as it relates to the manager form of government. The council manager form of government works because it envisions the council and the manager being on the same page of certain goals and priorities and getting things done on behalf of the community. That doesn't always take place in other forms of government in which the executive and the legislative may be heading in opposite directions as to what their goals are. Communities, the unsuccessful communities out there are the ones where the executive and the council or legislative branch are at loggerheads and they're not working together.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll give back. I think the piece there on the taking the negative aspect of politics out there, and I know politics is a bad word sometimes, but it ultimately means government doing what the voters want, right? And so I don't know how much you can separate that. And so figuring out how to make sure that is a product process and we're not divorcing it entirely and just trying to make government act like a business, which is the city manager form of government possibly. But no, absolutely. And I appreciate those thoughts on the term limit process.
And if I may, Councillor, I happen to be a big supporter of what government can do. So and the value of politics is part of that. But
thank you, Mr. Lynch. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McGovern, you have the floor.
Thank you,
Madam
Chair.
Chair. Question.
Yeah, thank you. Through you. It's more of more of a statement in terms of I really don't want to underestimate the charter conversation as well. I have a slightly different opinion than Councillor Sabrina Wheeler in terms of, there's change and then there's change, right? I mean, talking about what we did last night in terms of talking about changing the way committees get appointed is one thing. Changing to a strong mayor where the city manager's job is significantly diminished, asking someone to, obviously it depends on where they're coming from, right? If somebody's coming from, another town around Cambridge, that's one thing. But to ask somebody to, uproot from another part of the country and move their kids out of school and, move the community that they live in, when we might turn around and say, well, now we're going to strip you of, most of your authority that we hired you for. I wouldn't assume that someone who's unwilling to do that is someone we wouldn't want. That's a huge ask. I mean, we're not talking about someone who, and I mean this respectfully, but we're not talking about someone who most likely you know, chances are that the person we're hiring is going to have some experience. They might be, you know, they might be older. It might be harder for them to move across the country, and a much bigger commitment for them to do that. So, you know, I don't think we can underestimate that part of the conversation. It does pay well, but I will also point out, and Councilor Nolan knows, you know, the superintendent pays well, and it seems like we do these national searches and we end up with people from, you know, the Metro Boston area for the most part. So even though we pay a lot of money, there's not a lot of people banging down the door to move cross country to come here for whatever reason, right? And so I really don't want to underestimate. I'm not saying we shouldn't continue with the charter conversation, but we cannot underestimate. I mean, you just put yourself in that situation, right? You know, and that doesn't. I wouldn't assume that someone who's unwilling to move is someone we wouldn't want or wouldn't be good. So I think we have to be really cautious about that. And I just wanted to make that point. I'll yield because I want to get to the, you know, the other folks and on with the conversation. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor McGovern. Councilor Toomey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any further questions, but just want to let you know, Councilor Carlone's also in the room, and if you could add him, he would like to speak after the others, but his name's not on the board, so I want to make sure that he has an opportunity to ask a question.
Thank you, Councilor Toomey. I noticed that and I was going to call on him. I thank you for reminding me. If you're yielding the floor, I will now go to colleagues Nolan, the Vice Mayor, and Councilor Carlone. You'll be allocated 2 questions. I will turn the floor over to Councilor Nolan, after which we'll hear from the Vice Mayor, and then from Councilor Carlone. Mayor Siddiqui has yielded any questions at this time, but she certainly can jump in at any point should she change her mind. Councilor Nolan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Simmons. I appreciate this conversation. A quick note on the charter changes. The memos were pretty clear that there's not an appetite for the large-scale change of a switch to a strong mayor form of government. The kinds of change, although anything would be open, assuming there's a review next year, but it would be the kinds of changes that are more likely are to examine at large versus ward-based city councilors, changing other things about the charter. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but at least based on that review, let's be really clear, that was not the kind of change anticipated. Personally, I would, you know, I'm always for more democracy, but I think we have to be clear that the Collins Center memo is a public document that states pretty clearly that at least right now, that may or may not be the change. And if it could be delayed for 5 years. But my question is, I was surprised to hear that we couldn't do a committee of the whole for search. When I was on school committee in 2015, we had an extensive review of all the laws, legal advice. We have a very, very conservative legal opinion, or the kind of very strong, well-versed, incredibly savvy legal authority. And we were told, yes, the city could review. And the 7 of us were appointed as the search committee. There was a separate interview committee that expanded into large numbers of the public, but we did that. It was based on legal authority. It was all very clear that up until I think the finalists, all of the people who applied could be kept confidential. So I'm surprised to hear that there's not a method to do that here. If you could comment on that. I mean, I can send you the legal documents. David Marr was mayor at the time, and I'm sure we did everything according to the open meeting law. School committees are subject to the same kinds of open meeting laws as city council.
Yeah, I will. I'd be curious to see that and how that, and I'd be curious to see how the process worked exactly. That's really what I'd be, and maybe that's referenced in the legal documents. But I will say that, you know, if it's a, I'd be curious as to how they were able to do that and maintain the confidentiality. So, because it does seem to fly in the face of the Attorney General's guidance on this, and the interpretation of the open meeting law that's been out there for a good long period of time. So, I know that you know, by personal, I know that when I was appointed city manager in Lowell, the committee did act as a committee of the whole, and all of the documents were public, and all the resumes and the confidentiality of all the applicants was violated.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Councilor Nolan, do you have your second question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Simmons. My second question is to expand upon how it is that we get the best and most robust pool. You noted that the search in South Hadley now has 2 finalists, which are diverse. But my understanding is the first search in South Hadley, which you also ran, 3 of the 4 finalists actually dropped out. And so
Four of the finalists dropped out.
Okay, so in my understanding, having again participated in a couple superintendent searches, Cambridge is not actually, other than the search of a few years ago, the search prior to that was not a search. It was an appointment directly without any kind of search at all. And the prior one, even in 1980, was actually an internal promotion as well. So on the city manager side, we don't have as much experience as on the superintendent side. And my understanding, the key to a best pool is to make sure that there's not a strong internal candidate, because that is the factor that search consultants I've talked to across the board say is the single most important factor that will affect people's willingness to apply. And as you said yourself, I'm kind of surprised to hear it publicly, but if city managers are not supposed to ever apply to a job, if there's a city manager, now in our case, we have a city manager who's retiring, so that wouldn't apply. But I would like to hear comments on the idea that if there's any internal candidates, then that dramatically affects we're not sure that would happen here, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Internal candidates could have an impact. That's again why it's important to maintain that confidentiality, so that candidates, only know their own candidacy and don't know anybody else that's there. Now, that's, there are certainly situations where communities where internal candidates make it publicly known that they're going to apply. That's a challenge for us as when we do recruiting or when we do searches, that we have to make it clear to the candidate pool that asks whether in fact there are internal candidates and whether they have a leg up. And we have to make it known to them that the governing body has not made any commitments to an internal candidate and wants to see the broadest possible pool and is committed to us that they're interested in hiring the best possible candidate. So, but internal candidates certainly have an effect upon the pool, without a doubt.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. I'm going to ask you respectfully to yield the floor to the Vice Mayor to allow her to ask her 2 questions.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I just wanted to respond to something that Councilor Nolan said. I did actually help run the search when we hired Dr. Salim when I worked for David Meyer as the education liaison. And I don't think she's correct in that the open meeting laws changed significantly between when we hired City Manager DePasquale and when we hired Dr. Salim. I remember Mayor Meyer at that time being very, very surprised that we had to completely change our entire search process and schedule and the screening process at that time because of the way that the open meeting law changed. So I do think that Mr. Lynch is correct in terms of the open meeting law and what is allowed by the Attorney General's office and what is allowed to be made public in the new open meeting law search process. So I'd be interested to see what Councilor Nolan has, but I do think that Mr. Lynch is correct. I just wanted a couple of things. I know that Liz Unger is on the line from purchasing, and I don't know if this is the right time to ask this question, but I think, when we think about searching for a firm, we need a firm that has explicit city manager recruitment experience when looking at the RFP and not a consulting firm that does towns, because cities and towns are very, very different. My question for Ms. Unger is there a vehicle for the council to see the RFP and approve it before it is posted? So that's my main question, is really we're gonna, work on an RFP together as a committee, or you are, the government ops committee is going to do that with the community, but then when the RFP is written, does the Government Operations Committee get to approve that RFP, or does the council see it?
Ms. Unger, are you available? And if you do, would you please take the floor?
Through you, Madam Chair. Counselor, I think it's a discussion that we would have to have with the city solicitor as well. I think that we could come up with some form of mechanism where the council felt comfortable in what was being presented in the RFP without risking making that document too public. You know, my concern is always about not tainting the process, you know, being a process person, sometimes more than a policy person. And we wouldn't want anything in the RFP to be released that could give one potential consultant an advantage or a leg up in the process. So I think that there's certainly consideration for trying to have the council's concerns reflected in the RFP. And the mechanism that we go by to do that, I think we'll have to confer with the city solicitor to make sure that we're not risking making anything a public document before it should be.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's definitely a conversation that the Government Operations Committee should consider what that vehicle could be, you know, within the parameters that Ms. Unger has just outlined. In terms of advertising the RFP and recruitment, I think it's been mentioned here before, there's a number of us who have been involved in other searches, and that the search consultants tend to tap their own internal pool. I think the other thing is we need to be careful on some of the parameters that we set, that they might be too binding. You know, when we looked for Superintendent Salim, I think we had come up with, or the school committee and the community had come up with, you know, there needs to be experience, a superintendent experience. And so that automatically cut out anyone from a larger urban school district that, you know, maybe was an assistant or a deputy. So we just need to be careful there when we think about parameters. If we want somebody who, you know, maybe has a different background than a traditional city manager might have, we might want to think about saying, you know, that it would be great to have somebody with a background in public management, but it's not necessary, just to ensure that we have a great diverse pool that applies. And I think the last thing I'll say, and I'll yield back to my members, is I 100% agree that we need to be looking for a diverse candidate, and that should be at the forefront of all of our work. And the RFP should say that right up front, and it should be right at the forefront. But, you know, I want us to think about, if we are hiring a diverse candidate and that is our goal, I want us to be careful about thinking about decreasing the salary intentionally for whomever comes next. If we are thinking about, we want a diverse candidate, we want a next really diverse city manager, I'm not sure we can say that at the same time as saying we want to decrease the salary by $100,000 or something like that. So I just wanted to kind of bump that up into everybody's mind and make sure that we're being cognizant and aware of those two different things that we're saying at the same time. So I'll yield back at this time. Thank you, Chair Simmons, for convening this meeting. I look forward to the rest to come.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Thank you for yielding the floor. We move now to Councilor Carlone. You have the floor. Councilor Carlone, are you there? I don't see him. Councilor Carlone. I will come back to Councilor.
There it is. I'm sorry. I thought I unmuted, but I didn't. But now I'll start out and say the same thing. I wanted to thank everyone for a very informative meeting. Not often do we learn so much in such a little period of time. My question refers to something that Mr. Lynch talked about, and that is getting candidates from outside our area. And I was once told that part of it has to do with the retirement plan, a state retirement plan, and that's why we get a lot of Massachusetts people. Is that true, Mr. Lynch, or is that just, as I said, a rumor?
No, I think that is true. That is true.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's the retirement system is seen by many as being very generous, and it is if you stay in the system your entire career. If you're looking for someone to come from outside of the system, it depends on what point they are in their career. But if you are looking at someone that's coming in that's going to spend 5 years here or 10 years here, they may not reach a point where they would be vested. They would contribute roughly 11% of their compensation to the pension system, and they would never see the results of that. And the time that they're contributing to the retirement system would not be credited to their Social Security years. So you are correct. A later career individual who has some experience either in the public sector or in the private sector that's contributing to Social Security would see a larger percentage of their compensation be taken out of their paycheck and put into a system that they would not necessarily see the benefits of.
All right, thank you. That's a little discouraging, but I appreciate an honest answer. I yield, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Carlone. Councilor Toomey, I see you have your hand up. Is that being up from a previous query, or do you have a query that you'd like to ask before we move to another item? I don't hear it.
I believe Councilor Toomey had his hand raised for Councilor Carlone.
I thank you. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, I see you have your hand up. Are you having your hand up to ask an additional question, or is this from a previous query?
No, yeah, thank you. I had one additional piece.
I'm sorry, please?
Yep, I had an additional remark.
Please go forward. And then I would like to thank Mr. Lynch for his time, but please take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to flag something that I think we had talked about at the last Government Ops Committee meeting based on the last city manager contract renewal process, and something that the solicitor had flagged then, that one of the times where it's appropriate for the council to have their own lawyer separate from the city is in the city manager's contract process. And I think that would be helpful in thinking through some of these questions around the RFP process, around compensation, around term limits as well. I remember we had talked about it at the last committee meeting, and I'm blanking on if there was a specific next step for that, but that's something I think we should move forward with as well.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, I'm sorry, I am the din of the air conditioner in this room. There were a couple of items, but I was not able to jot them down that you said.
Well, apologies if I had a fan on showing on. In terms of the council having its own lawyer for the contract process, I think it would be helpful in thinking through some of these questions around the purchasing and the RFP process and the parameters around that. I think it would be helpful in thinking through compensation. I think it would be helpful in thinking through the term limits piece, as well as sort of other pieces of the contract that the council is going to have to negotiate and think about with this person.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Mr. Lynch, back to you. I want to first say thank you. I probably got more than what you signed up for, but I certainly appreciate you taking the time, giving up your time to help us walk through some of these knotty issues around this important aspect of our work, which is to hire the city manager. You are certainly invited, that's the word, to stay for the rest of the discussion, but you are not, it's no mandate to you. So please, on behalf of myself and the committee and the members here present, we want to thank you for giving of your time and your talent to help guide us through this discussion.
Well, thank you very much, and I wish you the best as you go through the process. And certainly, if you have other questions, I'm happy to be a resource to give you whatever guidance and advice, whatever that may be worth to you. But you know, it's an important step for the city, and again, I wish you the best of luck in that. And I'm here for you. All right.
Just as I was about to give you leave, I see that our solicitor, Ms. Blower, has her hand up. I don't know if it's a question that she may have wanted to put to you, and if you wouldn't mind just holding for a moment, let's just like to have her take the floor and see what her query might be. So, Ms. Blower, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I actually just was going to comment to Councilor Sabrina Wheeler's point that I think that the phase where council would have assistance of legal counsel is in actually negotiating the contract with a city manager, not in the RFP process, which would be designed by the purchasing agent with input from this committee, but it's not something that would be done. It is an RFP of the city of Cambridge, not something that would be subject to participation by an outside counsel.
Thank you, Ms. Blower, Solicitor Blower. And again, thank you to you, Mr. Lynch, for your time and your attention. And thank you for making yourself available if we have other, but I or the committee, or on behalf of the committee, have other questions. As you know, these processes are always very good processes, but they're extraordinarily labor intensive, and to have your expertise is certainly going to be an asset to us. So again, my thanks.
All right, take care. Thank you, everyone.
Now I'd like to turn a couple of things I want to ask of our committee. I know Councilor Toomey had said earlier in the meeting that he had a hard stop. We are, I don't have the clock in this room.
It's 12:22.
It is 12:22. We have 4 people in public comment that would like to speak, and we have this longer document. 2 things I'd like to ask of the committee. Would they indulge me, and I don't know if the clerk has a time commitment, and extending the meeting for another 30 minutes prior to our stop time, which would have been 1 o'clock. So that's to the members of the committee. Is there an appetite to extend the meeting for 30 minutes past the time? Yes.
Yeah, I could do 30 minutes, but I can't do longer than that. I have to take my kid to a doctor's appointment. So
very good. So do I hear any objections? Hearing them, then I will entertain a motion by Councilor McGovern to extend the meeting to 11:30. Mr. Clerk, would you, not 11:30, 1:30, I'm sorry, I got 11:30 in the brain. Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
On that motion, that is to suspend the rules to extend the meeting to 1:30. Councilor McGovern.
yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan. Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 in favor, 0 against.
Okay, thank you. So before you members, there is a document that I put together. As we know that the 2016 city manager search, that the typical recruitment and selection process was with 1 consultant, can take about 175 hours to conduct. At least 50 hours of this time is administrative, including ad placement, acknowledgement of resumes, references, interviews, and due diligence of candidates. The Government Operations Committee should be kept informed about the recruitment process, and the consultant should ensure that their availability to provide information and answer questions. The details of the process, such as placement of advertising, applications received or discussed in regular updates via telephone or by email. As chair of the Government Operations Committee, I'm proposing a 6-phase consultant-led city manager search. It is based in part on the model that was utilized during the 2016 search. And the phases are, phase 1 would be position assessment, position announcement, and brochure development. Phase 2 would be advertising, candidate recruitment and outreach. Phase 3, candidate evaluation and screening. Phase 4, presentation of recommended candidates. Phase 5, interviewing process. Phase 6, appointment of candidate. Phase 6, appointment of candidate, and then it goes on to talk about the recruitment schedule. A detailed recruitment schedule should be provided to the Government Operations Committee in Phase 1, and this committee should receive regular reports from the consultant and monitor the timetable to ensure any approvals that may be needed or granted. The recruitment and selection process should be expected to take 18 to 20 weeks, similar to what Mr. Lynch said, from the time the contract is signed until the candidate is appointed, and consultants should be prepared to work with the city on a shorter process if that is desired. The overall process should strive to achieve the following milestones and deliverables, which are on the lot. Maybe it's on the, I didn't even know it was on the screen. Weeks 1 through 4, on-site interviews of Cambridge officials and city staff, development and approval of recruitment brochure, those are the deliverables. Weeks 4 through 9, placement of professional announcements, candidate identification, screening, interview, and evaluation of consultant. 9 through 12, consultant recommendation to preliminary screening committee of qualified candidates. Screening committee conducts interviews in this period. Deliverables are the recruitment report. Week 13 to 14, selection of candidates, finalists for council, additional background and reference checks, report preparation, presentation, deliverables of the interview report, including suggested questions and evaluation sheets. Then week 16 to 18, the interviews of selected finalist candidates, council selection of final candidates, negotiation, offering acceptance, and appointment. The city manager search process should allow sufficient time for stakeholder input, recruitment preliminary, candidate reviews, discussion with the screening committee, interviews by the screening committee, the decision and the presentation of the finalists to the city council, 2 rounds of council interviews, the meets and greets, city tours, and the final decision of the city council. I lay this out before you as a template. I am not wed to this in any way, but I wanted to give the city council's committee on government operations a document through which to work, to tease out some of the elements that we would like to have as a part of this process. I think that we can agree that a consultant should be hired to do this process. So I would certainly entertain a motion to have a consultant, because regardless of how the process looks, this city council should not be the sole entity that runs this process. I hope there's some agreement on that. But that's an important hurdle for us to get past. I know there are other aspects that have come to the table that are important, which is community engagement, the engagement and recruitment, and having presented to us a diverse pool. One of the things I think that was an impediment to the prior pool, I believe, was that there was in the job description that the person should have city manager experience. We know from now, having gone through that experience and through what we have learned on our own or in presentations, is that when you that there are so, particularly in the New England area, so few city managers that are women, if any, and none of color, that if that's the requirement, we are really compressing the pool quite a bit. So I want to bring our attention back to phase 1 to see if there's any questions, anything that you would like to input into phase 1, because what I would like to bring back is the document that outlines what the process would look like. But in the meantime, I want to run that in tandem with at least allowing or putting the city manager on notice that we'd like to hire a consultant to lead this process. The floor is open.
Madam Chair?
Council McGovern.
I certainly agree that we need to hire a firm. And just so that there's no confusion, gosh, I'm blanking on the man's name who was just here.
Mr. Lynch.
Mr. Lynch. You brought him in to give us some advice. That it was not to hire. We will do an RFP. A few people have sent me emails saying oh, hey, you've chosen the search firm already. That is not the case, correct?
No, that is not the case. Thank you for that education.
Okay.
I reached out, and I thought I said that earlier in my discussion, maybe not plainly enough. In trying to put together something for the Government Operations Committee to look at, I inquired of the MMA as to who might be good to go to. And they gave me a few names. I settled on Mr. Lynch, asked him would he be willing to come and talk through some of the issues that had come up in our earlier conversation, because I felt it was important that we heard from someone who lives in this community, in this area of expertise. He was willing to give of his time to do that. He is under no impression, nor has any offer of employment been made to him.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in section 1 here, phase one, fourth bullet down, consultant shall plan and execute a town hall style. I think we have to go beyond that. I think if we have a town hall, I mean, that's good. I'm not saying we should replace that, but I really worry about representation at something like that. I think about the outreach we do around participatory budgeting, the outreach we did around Envision, where there were actually meetings held within public housing buildings. There were meetings held in different neighborhoods. I think we need to do something along those lines. So I would suggest that we put something like that in, that it's not just, and again, I don't know if this will be Zoom or in person, things are changing. Certainly if it's in person, where we have that meeting and who can have the time to show up at that meeting is going to influence who's in the room. So I would want to see the search firm in their outreach to the community actually develop a plan to facilitate conversations with residents that we don't often hear from. And so that's going to be a targeted, specific, strategic outreach that they're going to have to do to those folks who live in those communities. So I would add that somewhere in here in phase 1.
Okay, very good.
And I'm fine for now. Thank you.
Very good. Other inputs on phase 1?
Madam Chair.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thank you. Well, apologies. Okay, I'm just making sure I understand phase 1. I am happy to engage a search firm. I think I echo the Vice Mayor's comments on the RFP process and just making sure the council has input on that, which I think will determine the search firm. And then I think much about the consultant is how they're going to work with the council and the community and putting forward the job description rather than a big change to phase 1. I did have a comment about one of the ways, but I think that's it.
And Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, your voice tends to trail off as you conclude, so I don't always hear the end of what you're saying. As long as the clerk can hear you, I guess it's fine, but I just wanted to say for me, I find it hard to hear you as you end your comment. Your voice tends to trail off.
Thanks. Yeah, the end was just saying that was the thoughts for phase 1. I had a couple other thoughts on the other phases.
Okay, I want to just keep our attention on phase 1 because this gives me a working document to bring back to this committee. So is there any other inputs on phase 1?
Madam Mayor?
Is that Councilor Zondervan? Because I can't see people's faces on the screen at all. Is that Councilor Zondervan?
Yes.
Yeah, Councilor Zondervan, yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we are raising our hands in Zoom. I don't know if you.
Yeah, why can't I see?
Can't do it when.
Okay. Thank you, clerk. It was. Thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Zondervan. I can see you and everybody else now. Thank you. Go forward.
Great. Thanks so much. So, I mean, at a first glance, this looks fine to me, but I am a little bit confused about the timing. Because, I mean, we only just saw this document this morning. But when do we imagine that this phase 1 would begin?
as I see it, the phase one is basically what we are gonna do, but in consultant or in concert with a consultant. What I need is your inputs on, is this the right thing that we want to put forward as we're thinking through it? So it's all handing in tandem, because I don't think this is something that the council can do. But we have to have a working, operational document, at least the way I think of it, to work from.
Right, but assuming that we get there, when do we expect this phase one process to initiate?
I would like to start as soon as we have a consultant on board. I would assume, so that it would follow the RFP process. That's the way I'm thinking it through.
Okay, so what does that mean? So if the city issues an RFP a month from now, and then we bring a firm on board a month later, so are we talking about September? I'm just trying to get a sense of when.
So what I would say to you, Counselor, is I want to take all of your inputs and follow up, have a follow-up meeting. In that meeting, we will have those questions answered for you. I will try to have a revised timeline for you. So just give me what your thoughts are now, and then I will bring this back by way of a.
Okay, I appreciate that. I do need some time to review this document and give more detailed feedback, but my initial reaction is really just a question about timing. So I would appreciate.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Zahn. Councilor Toomey, do you have your hand up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To you, Madam Chair, for the purpose of discussion, should there be a motion on the floor to, request the city manager to appropriate the necessary funds to hire a consultant or search process? As we're looking at this document, should that be on the floor now too?
Yeah, Councilor Toomey, I think that's a wise decision. We have to sort of walk and chew gum while we are putting together what we see as the direction that we want to go through. We don't want to prolong what we know that what we are going to do, which is hire a consultant. So I think it's very appropriate to at least move that we will hire a consultant to do the process for us, and that we will want the city manager to appropriate the amount of money that might be needed. It's hard to say. People said $50,000. I don't know if that's a right figure, so I would kind of leave it somewhat open-ended, but I think it'd be quite appropriate to at least have a motion where we say that, yes, we would want to go forward and hire a consultant so that that process can be at least poised when we are ready to go forward. So very appropriate that you put that forward, Mr. Councilor Toomey.
I move that.
So Councilor Toomey has put a motion on the floor that the Government Operations Committee vote to direct the city manager to one, have a consultant for the process of hiring the city manager, and two, that the city manager be directed to appropriate the appropriate funds for that search. So on that motion, I would ask the city clerk to call the roll.
Madam Chair?
I've asked, is this a discussion on the motion?
It is, yep.
Okay, very good.
Could I would just motion to make an amendment to add and present an RFP to the council?
And present an RFP?
Madam Chair, I'm having a hard time keeping up with the structure of the motion. So,
okay.
Still write it down.
Can you type up the motion for you? Okay, I'm going to type up the motion for you, Clerk Wilson, and have that sent to you so that you can put it on the screen. Let me go back to Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, who's going to add an amendment to that motion, I believe. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, I'm turning the floor back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, if it's on the screen, I can maybe put it in there specifically. But would like to add an amendment that an RFP be presented to the council for a search firm that has city manager experience working with cities.
Send it to me again, Counselor, that an
RFP be presented to the council for a search firm that has experience working with cities.
Is that a separate motion as opposed to amendment?
Well, I believe we're talking about an appropriation for a search firm, so I just want to make sure we see the RFP before we appropriate the funds for the firm.
Okay, so your motion is that an RFP be presented to the committee. And I have to, what's the rest of that language?
For a search firm that has experience working with cities.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Toomey.
Thank you. I assume Ms. Unger is still on the Zoom. If Ms. Unger could respond to that.
So there's a question just on your amendment, Counselor, is on demand, just to see if if we could get a little clarity on the wording of that motion. So I'm going to go to Ms. Unger to see if she can weigh in to answer the question that Councilor Toomey has posed on your proposed amendment. Ms. Unger.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe I'm responding to the question of presenting the RFP to the council.
Yes, ma'am.
I would advise against making the RFP or distributing the RFP publicly before it is advertised.
Very good. Councilor Toomey, do you have any follow-up to that question?
No, I just wanted a clarification to make sure that we follow this process according to the rules and regulations. And so, thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Thank you, Councilor Toomey. I see Councilor Vice Mayor Mallon has her hand up. Is this question on the amendment?
I had a clarifying question, but I'm not a member of the committee.
You may ask your clarifying question.
Is the motion on the floor to hire a consultant to guide us through the process of getting to the RFP, which would then hire a different consultant? I guess I'm confused.
No. So the way I see, that's why I asked my colleague, was that maybe what he was putting forward, a separate vote. The vote, I think, coming from Councilor Toomey is if the Government Ops Committee agrees that we should hire a consultant, then let's vote that we do that. So that process has already been sort of approved, if you will, as we're moving this process forward. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, not to speak for him, I believe, wants to attach to that motion that the RFP to hire a city manager come before the council. That's why I was asking if I understood it right. I thought that might be a separate motion.
Madam Chair, yeah, not the RFP for the city manager, for the search firm. So if we're voting on the consultant right now, would like to have input on the RFP for that consultant.
So the councilor's amendment is that the RFP that goes out on the firm itself come before the council, which which Ms. Unger has opined may not be a good idea, but that is his amendment he's placed before us. So if there's no other discussion on the amendment, we will vote the amendment first. And if the amendment passes, we will vote the main order as amended. If the amendment fails, it will fail, and then we'll go to the main motion, which is to hire a consultant.
Madam Chair, can I ask it through to you to Ms. Unger?
So hold on. So I wanted to make sure everyone understood what I believe to be the precedence of the voting. Now, Councilor Sabrina Wheeler wants to ask another question of Ms. Unger. Ms. Unger, are you poised to answer another question relative to your amendment, Councilor?
I guess I'm just a little confused about the order of operations. It sounds like we're voting on hiring a consultant, but Ms. Unger says it wouldn't make sense to share the RFP yet. I guess I'm concerned. I'm just confused about how we can vote to hire a consultant, but not to to
Just
be an
asking for
RFP
the
for
money
it.
to be appropriate. You're just asking for.
Well, Counselor, we're just asking to make sure the money is poised to hire a consultant. We have not gotten to the RFP process. So maybe we're putting the cart before the horse. Well, we're just, and not to speak for Counselor Toomey, but there's a motion before us to hire a consultant. That's number one. There's another motion or bifurcated as a part of that motion is that the appropriate funds be allocated. That's it.
I guess it goes back to sort of what we were talking about last night. If we vote to appropriate the funds, we don't have any other say about how those funds are spent. So I would like the RFP to be part of that.
Well, I'm not gonna, okay. Ms. Unger, is there any more that you would like to opine on this amendment of the RFP part of this motion?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. Once the RFP is finalized, which I am anticipating would involve input from government ops at the minimum, that final document should not be shared beyond the confines of that group prior to the document being advertised publicly, because it will taint the process that is required for an RFP. The other thing that I do, through you, Madam Chair, wish to bring just for a point of consideration to the council at this point, is that in order for the city to use the Section 6 RFP process under Chapter 30B, currently the threshold is different than it was back in 2016.
Okay.
And that means that in order to be able to use the RFP process, we have to be in the dollar frame, the threshold of over $50,000. And it can be $50,000 in a penny, okay? But I need to be over $50,000. And I just bring that to the council's attention because back in 2016, the threshold was different. So that RFP contract came in at 42,000, I believe, and change. So I'm just not hesitant, but I'm wary. I just want to share that information with the council that we hope that I'll do a little market research to find out. Do we anticipate that this will allow us to use the RFP process, the anticipated thresholds?
So, Ms. Unger, if I may, if not putting a dollar amount puts us in a gray area, or are you saying we should put a dollar amount in there? I just said the last.
No, to you, Madam Chair, I'm saying that if we do not anticipate and ultimately receive proposals that are greater than $50,000 in response to this process, I would not be able to award a contract for a dollar value less than $50,000 for a consultant using Section 6 of Chapter 30B. Back in 2016, that threshold amount where cities were allowed to use the RFP process was lower. It was approximately 35,000. There was a jump from 25,000 to 35,000. Then in November of 2016, that threshold jumped up to 50,000. There is legislation at the State House to change that requirement and allow us to use it at a lower threshold, but the current standing is that I would not be able to award a contract using an RFP process for less than 50. And I only bring it to the council's attention because last time it wasn't quite there, which it didn't have to be. And my hope is that costs have increased in the 5 years so that we're there. So I just put it as.
So I just want to ask you again. So there should be some specific language to make sure that we are able to become within what the law requires, or is it just enough to say that we hire a consultant? That's what I'm trying to get clear from you.
We can say that we want to hire a consultant using the RFP process if that's the appropriate process at the time.
This is very confusing. Okay, I think I have it. want to go to Councilor Zondervan and then to Councilor McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of clarifying questions. I don't understand what happens if it does come in under the limit. What does that mean? If you're not able to hire someone using the RFP process, what's the consequence of that?
I think that's a question from Ms. Unger. Ms. Unger, the counselor wanted to know what happens if we set our sites so that we can use the RFP process. What happens if all of the bids that come in are lower?
I cannot award a contract under the law.
Okay. Councilor Zondervan, does that answer your question? Because I think we have a little bit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, it does not. So are we saying that we can't hire people and do work that costs less than $50,000?
Using the RFP process, I think was what she's saying. I think what she's saying, and not to speak for her, we can have a process and pay X. But if we want to use the RFP process, it has to be over, it has to be $50,001. And if it's not, we can't use the RFP process. That's what I believe I hear Ms. Unger saying.
Right.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes.
Through you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I guess I don't understand why that's a concern. I mean, we will go through the RFP process, and if we get bids that are under $50,000, that's awesome, because then we have to pay $50,000.
You're right, it's off. We just won't be able to use the RFP process to do it. That's what she's being very clear about. If it comes in over that, she will not award the contract through the RFP process because the law.
Right, but we can still.
We just
right, but we can still hire somebody.
Okay.
Right, but we can still hire someone, right? They just can't use that particular process.
That's what it sounds like to me, Councilor.
Okay, and then I did want to briefly respond to Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, my colleague, that I don't think we're voting on an appropriation. We're voting to ask the city manager to bring forward an appropriation, which we will then vote on in the city council subsequently. And then in terms of viewing the RFP prior to its public release, again, my question is, would it be possible to view it in executive session prior to public release?
I would have to ask Ms. Unger. That's way beyond my scope of influence. Ms. Unger, if the council has a question about being able to view well, I'm not even going to call it the RFP anymore. I'm going to call it the proposal for a consultant. Can that be viewed by the council as, are you saying the council or are you saying the government ops committee?
I'm asking about the council specifically as a whole.
So if the council as a whole were to participate in that, could that be done in executive session?
For the executive session, through you, Madam Mayor, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I would refer to the city solicitor on her opinion about whether executive session would be appropriate for that.
Right. Madam, I think it probably might not, but I will defer to the city solicitor, who I believe is still with us. Ms. Lowe, could you opine on what the criteria, could that or could that not be done? And then we'll move on to, I think it's Councilor McGovern.
Madam Chair, I apologize, but I'm a little confused as to exactly what would be discussed in executive session. Is this about reviewing the RFP, or excuse me, the request for bids that could result in an RFP if it was for up to $50,000? Or is there something else that you
I'm not going to speak for Councilor Zondervan. Councilor Zondervan, could you be more specific in what you're asking?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
What is it you like?
Ms. Unger had stated that it would not be permissible, or she did not recommend sharing the RFP prior to its public release with the council, which I fully understand, because at that point it would be a public reveal, which kind of defeats the purpose of a separate public reveal of it. So my question is, would she be able to share it with the council in executive session prior to its public release so the council could review it and give any comments or feedback that we may have on it prior to it being publicly released.
Thank you, Councillor Zondervan. So through you, Madam Chair, I don't think so. I think that that would not be one of the permissible reasons for going into executive session. I'd have to look at that more closely and get back to you on it. But at this time, I do not think so. So therefore, if the committee wanted to have input on the RFP, it could do so if there were less than a quorum of the city council who were appointed by this committee to review the proposal before it is finalized, but that would not be an executive session, and therefore there would not be any open meeting law concern about that review and participation in that process.
Very good, thank you. So what I'd like to do is, so there's an amendment, which might, if it passes, we'll get more information from the solicitor. If it doesn't, it's a moot point. So there's a motion before us. Mr. Clerk, do you have the language for the amendment? And did you send the other over to me?
So the
Madam Chair.
motion. Oh.
Yes, Councilor.
Apologies. I think, based on the piece from the solicitor about what is possible and is not, I think it makes sense to withdraw that motion and put forward another motion to have 2 members of this committee confer on an RFP process. And that could be, Chair Simmons and myself, or different members if different members of the committee would like. But if that is the way we have to do it, I would put forward that motion.
So you're withdrawing your earlier amendment and now adding this new amendment that 2 members of the Government Ops Committee participate in the RFP process or the procurement process, whichever it ends up being.
Yep, Councilor Simmons and Councilor Sabrina would be the amendment. Thank you.
Very good. So is there any discussion on that amendment? I see Councilor McGovern's hand is up. I don't know if Councilor Zondervan, I think you've had the floor before, so let's go to Councilor McGovern to discuss this amendment.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm sorry. I'll take my hand down. Questions were answered.
Very good. So if there's no further discussion, we're going to first vote on Councilor Sabrina Wheeler's amendment that 2 members of the Government Ops Commission be appointed to look at RFPs and or proposals, whichever it ends up being. That's not very good language, but is that the essence of your order?
And specifically, the amendment was to name the counselors. So
okay, Councilor Simmons and Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Exactly. Thank you.
Is that the essence? I want to make sure I have the right language.
It is. Thank you.
Chair Simmons, if I may. So
yes, you sure.
The current motion is to send in a policy order to the city council that'll read that the city manager be and hereby is requested to appropriate the sufficient funds to hire a city manager search firm consultant. I believe that what's been proposed as amendment may work better just as a separate motion because it sounds like this is not specifically towards the city manager. This is the city council or this committee putting together a subsection of its membership.
Okay, very good. I lean into your recommendation. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, with your permission, could we offer that as a separate motion?
Yes,
very good. So in order of precedence of the motions, Mr. Clerk, should Councilor Sabrina Wheeler's precede the other motion by Councilor Toomey? What would be the order of voting?
The current motion that has precedence is Councilor Toomey's motion. Okay,
then Councilor Toomey's motion is before us. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. On a motion by
can the clerk just read the
do you have the language? We just sent the language, Clerk Wilson, if you want to put it up on the screen.
Yeah, so I'll read this and put it on the screen.
Does everyone see that?
So the current motion is that the city manager be and hereby is requested to appropriate the sufficient funding to hire a city manager search firm consultant.
Boy, what a complex motion that is.
Okay. All right, sorry, Council Garland, you've been here too long. Okay, discussion. Hearing none on the motion, please call the roll.
On the motion. Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Always.
Councilor Zondervan. Absent.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes 5 in favor, 0 against.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. On the second motion being offered by Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, do you have the language, Clerk Wilson?
Yes, give me 1 second. I'm just going to read it for the council. Councilor Sabrina Will, I'm going to put it on the screen and read it, and you just correct me where I've misunderstood. That Councilor Simmons and Councilor Sabrina Wheeler of the Government Operations Committee review any RFPs produced to hire a city manager search firm consultant.
Could we add after RFPs or other process?
What is other process? You mean in terms of when you say other process, Councilor? It means if it's not the RFP, if it doesn't qualify for the RFP process and it's just a consultant contract.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, we could say or other search process if we want to be more specific, but just trying to respond to Ms. Unger's point.
Very good, Councilor. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
On that motion, Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 in favor, 0 against.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I call our attention back to phase 2. I wanted to know if there's any comments, changes, ideas that you'd like to offer at this time. Hearing none, I would like to then ask you about phase 3.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Thank you. Yeah, I had questions or thoughts about 3, and it goes into the 4 and 5, and it's number 3 talks about a screening process, and then in step 5 it talks about a separate screening committee. So I'm a little confused about the process. It sounds like the consultant would do some additional screening and decide who was qualified at a general basis, and then there would be a separate screening committee that would narrow it down to 4 or 5 finalists, and that those finalists would be presented to the council. I think my concerns about the different steps of just wanting to make sure we're not the council isn't coming in only at that last process in terms of the winnowing, and that we end up with 4 or 5 finalists that we aren't the council isn't as excited about, or like last time doesn't have any women or people of color. So wanting to make sure that the council is included in those previous processes on the screening committee and the additional screening, if that's separate, just to make sure that the council isn't only coming in at the finalist stage, to make sure that it's not just the finalists we're having a say on.
Thank you for that concern, Councilor Sabrina Wheeler. The reason why I'm offering this as a template and idea is from what I've heard from Ms. Gore, from Ms. Unger, from Mr. Lynch, and other people too numerous to mention, is they really do steer us away from being involved too heavily, too early on, because it may chill the process of people applying, because when the number of the people participating, particularly in the resume screening process, is too great, it puts it in the public domain. And so I'm working toward trying to balance everything that you're saying, Counselor. I'm with you on, I want diversity in the pool, I want the richness, I want the participation, but I don't want us to tip it such that we contaminate, it's not the best word, but it's all I can think of right now, contaminate the process so that some of the better candidates, particularly if they're coming from farther away, won't come because they don't want to be put out there. So I'm trying to balance between the integrity of the process so that we can get those folks, by saying, let's put the screening process that we, the council, can have some input as to who sits on it, but we don't necessarily sit on it, because our position, as I participated in the past, has been more on the executive level. So we enlist and rely on people from the community, and it's another way of getting that community process in there that's going to know what we want to do, because the council's made it very clear we're going to have this process that's enriched at the beginning to say this is what we want. So we should, I hope, not get any resumes that don't represent that interest. And if we did, the screening committee, I'm hoping, will be imbued with the knowledge that you stop, hold the presses, this is not a rich enough pool, we can't have it. Then it comes again to us. So I do get it, Counselor. I just don't want to thwart the process. I would recommend that we kind of lean into the idea of having this screening committee that does that work with the proper training. I mean, I wish in a lot of ways that Barbara Allen was still here. She was a master at this. I may have to call on her to see if she'll give us a little bit of her expertise, but that's what I would really recommend, Counselor.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, for this first step, I don't think the council needs to be involved in that sort of resume screen piece, that initial step. I think it's that screening committee, which looks like it's step 4 or step 5, that I think the council should be a bit more involved in. I'm just really concerned about us getting down to 3 or 4 applicants, and there's no women, no people of color, and we've gone through a year at that point, and it's too late to start over. So if there's a way to have a little more council involvement in that narrowing when we get down there.
Let me see, and I'm certainly listening to you, how, we can get that in. I hear what the council's saying. I also want to make sure that we don't do anything to thwart our best intentions. So I'm going to note that, and let's see let's see if we can work that in. If there's nothing else, I think we were at 4.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Council's on demand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're looking at phase 2 or 3?
My pages are not paginated, so I'm in phase 5.
Phase 5?
But by my documents, phase 5. I don't know what page that's going to be on for you, because I don't have it. My pages I'm looking at a paper, not the computer, and my pages are not paginated. So
where is the screening committee formed? I'm not finding that.
It's earlier.
Oh, I see. That's part of phase 1.
The screening committee will be whatever the appointed counselors and non-counselors.
The consultant will meet with the screening committee. That's in part 4. Are you talking about the appointment of the screening committee?
Correct. Yeah, I found it. So that's the end of phase 1. There shall be a city manager screening committee, the composition of which shall be determined by the government ops committee and the purchasing department.
Yes.
And membership should be at the end of the community.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, I guess my question there is exactly what that decision-making process looks like, because if it's a city manager appointed committee, then technically the council doesn't have any say. So
The screening committee
understand the mechanics of that decision.
In past iterations of screening committees, the government ops will be engaged. First of all, you see the complexion talks about representation of the city at large, leadership, neighborhood associates, public interest groups. And so what the government ops committee would do is recommend people who should sit on that committee. One idea I had was that each person maybe recommends 1 or 2 people from the government ops that should be on this screening committee, so we have some sense of diversity. But this would be a decision that the government ops committee would make. Once that's formed, they would be in line to work with the consultant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm a little bit confused because my understanding is that we are not allowed to participate or I don't want to say interfere, but we're not allowed to guide appointments to city manager committees. So,
and maybe I interpret it differently. I believe in my experience has been that we can. Now, if that's not the case, I can certainly check that, but I just took a different understanding. Ms. Blower is lit up. Ms. Blower, did you want to opine on that at all, or?
Madam Chair, I was actually going to, excuse me, invite you to ask Ms. Unger, but I believe that in the past, when there's been a city manager's committee, hiring committee appointed, so for example, to assist with the process for appointing a consultant, whether it's RFP or a different process, then although technically this is under the manager's purview, there have been city councilors appointed to that committee so as to get input from the government ops committee. And it certainly doesn't violate anything to have 2 members of the government ops committee on that committee. So I would welcome the purchasing agents weighing in on that as well. But that's been my understanding in the past.
Very good. Ms. Unger?
Through you, Madam Chair, if I'm understanding correctly what the city solicitor is saying, Solicitor, are you referencing the evaluation committee that would go through the
No, I think she's referencing this.
Or the screening committee who would then work with the consultant?
The screening committee that would work with the consultant.
I would have no concerns about that impacting the RFP process, because what in my mind, if I'm envisioning this correctly, the screening committee's actions would begin once the consultant had been hired. And they would, so my piece of this would be finished once the procurement process is successful and results in a consultant under contract.
Madam Chair?
Ms. Solicitor Glowa, yes.
Thank you. And again, through you to Ms. Unger, if I understood correctly from the motion that Councilor Sabrina Wheeler just made, which was to have Councilor Simmons and Councilor Sabrina Wheeler participate in reviewing the RFP to make sure that it has the elements that the Government Ops Committee would be interested in before it's issued. That would be one phase in which there would be city council representation in that process through the 2 members of the Government Ops Committee being appointed to work with the purchasing and personnel departments and others in preparing that RFP so that you make the Government Ops Committee is comfortable that there's been representation by those 2 councilors in that process. That's what I was just referring to. But in addition, I agree with Ms. Unger that once the RFP has been issued and a consultant has been hired, then there would be 2 members of the Government Ops Committee appointed to the screening committee that would be formed at that time.
I don't know if that was quite my colleague's question, and he certainly can speak for himself, but I think what he was asking was, can the Government Ops Committee appoint or choose members for the screening committee? Was that not your question, Councilor? Or did I misunderstand?
Correct, Chair, and to be even more precise, I guess I'm trying to understand who's appointing the screening committee. Is it the city manager or the city council? Because it's ultimately
So
the city
my
council's responsibility
right.
to
So
hire the next city manager.
not to cut you off, but to cut you off. I believe that's under our purview if I'm correct. Now, I'd have to have them tell me I was wrong, that it would be the government ops or a hybrid that would appoint the screening committee. That's what I was thinking, not the city manager would appoint. I understand what you're saying. City manager appoints committees. I would think, at least I assumed, or my experience has been, except in this instance. So am I wrong? Ms. Unger or Ms. Blower?
To you, Madam Chair, I don't believe that that's in my wheelhouse for the screening committee. I think that's a question for the city solicitor, so I shall defer.
So, Madam Chair, if we're talking about
the screening committee,
right, under phase one, at the end of phase one, just before phase two, it says there shall be a city manager screening committee, the composition of which shall be determined by the Government Operations Committee and Purchasing Department. Is this the screening committee we're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Chair. So back to you and through you to Councilor Zondervan. I agree that it's in the council's wheelhouse, subject to the issues relating to the open meeting law. So in order to avoid problems with the open meeting law, that should be limited to no more than 4 members of the council.
I got it. Okay. All right. I think I have an answer for that. Thank you. Councilor Zondervan, do you follow?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I guess the part that confused me, well, first of all, the word city manager screening committee, that phrase is confusing because
city manager screening meaning the city manager hiring process screening committee, maybe
The committee that
right.
It's the committee that hires is hiring is sort of shepherding this process, not meaning the city manager and his person.
Right. So maybe we just remove city manager because it's implied that that's what the screening committee is for. And
Absolutely.
Then the other part that confused me is the mentioning of the purchasing department as well as the government ops committee, because again, strictly speaking, it should be determined by the city council, not by the government operations committee. And then I don't understand the reference to the purchasing department.
Okay, I'm going to pause right here because we're at 1:17, and I did say we would have public comment. So if you could stand down to allow for us to have public comment, and then we can come back. Hopefully we can answer some of these questions. And if not, if I can get tacit approval, I can always work in any of your suggestions. But I don't want us to not be able to get to public comment. So if you would demur, Counselor, I would like to open up public comment at this time and go back to the clerk who is in public comment and say to those that would like to comment the amount of time. We're going to limit it to 3 minutes. Usually would say 5, but I apologize. We got so late. Just teasing this out. So 3 minutes per speaker. Mr. Clerk, would you please introduce those that may be in queue?
The first speaker is Kate Frank.
This is going to run past 1:30.
Naomi, is Kate Frank in the Zoom? I believe she's not in the Zoom.
Okay, Clerk Wilson, I just want to ask a question of you because we're at 1:17 and we said we were going to extend the meeting to 1:30. Do we have to extend the meeting again to get through public comment, or will the meeting expire at 1:30?
The meeting will expire 1:30. I believe that we will have time to get through public comment unless you want to do a motion to extend.
Just to be on the safe side, I'm going to ask Councilor Zondervan to move a motion to extend for at least 15 minutes because I want to be sure we get through public comment before the meeting expires. So on the motion by Councilor Zondervan to extend for 15 minutes, Please call the roll.
On that motion to extend the meeting until 1:45, Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Zondervan.
Councilors on demand?
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 in favor, 0 against.
Mr. Clerk, please go back to public comment.
The next speaker I have who's in the Zoom is Michael Brandon. Mr. Brandon, you should be able to speak. You're gonna unmute yourself, you can speak. I believe Mr. Brandon must be having some trouble. He appears to be unmuted. I'm going to go to the next speaker.
Okay, very good.
It is Heather Hoffman.
Hello, Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street, and surprised to be the first, at least to be successful at speaking. I wanted, first of all, thank the chair for being sure to get to public comment. Sometimes it feels as though the council doesn't want to hear from us. And so I am really glad, and I'm not being sarcastic or ironic or anything. I am very glad. I would like to endorse what Councilor McGovern said very heartily about getting a wide swath of the public involved in deciding what we want to see. Now, as someone who I think can be classed as one of the usual suspects, I hope that you will listen to us as well. But I know that I learn a whole ton when I hear from people who aren't always involved in speaking out on public decisions. So I hope that the consultant will understand that it's important to be very creative in figuring out how to make people know that they have an opportunity to comment and feel comfortable having an opportunity to comment. One of the things that I also know about how things go in Cambridge is that there are many people who are afraid to speak up. They're afraid of retaliation in one way and another. And so I want to make sure that people feel very comfortable expressing their real hopes and desires for the next city manager. And I will give you just a very short synopsis of mine. I'd like someone with vision. Someone's got to have vision in this city. And since the city manager is currently on top of all of the decision making, seems to me the city manager ought to have some. Cambridge is more than a balance sheet. It's a real place. People live here. We want people to want to live here. And lots of different types of people, and we want to make them comfortable. So I would like a city manager with vision and a city manager who's willing to listen to people. I want someone who doesn't make the decision and then goes through the performance of having public input that no one will pay attention to because the decision's already been made. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Clark?
That's it for the individuals who are in public comment who signed up. I'm just going to try to go back to Michael Brandon one more time to see if he's able to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Mr. Brandon, you are unmuted. If you could go ahead and give your comment. He appears to be having some difficulty. That is it for the people in public comment.
So we're not able to get Mr. Brandon, Mr. Clark,
It appears like we are unable to hear from him.
and there's no other people set up to speak, Mr. Clark?
No one else who signed up is in the Zoom. No.
Then I'll entertain a motion by Councilor McGovern to close public comment. Would you please call the roll?
On closing public comment, Councilor McGovern.
Yes.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Roll
Please state your
call.
point of order. Hold
We
on.
don't have to technically.
What did you say?
So roll call, we don't have to technically.
In the middle of a roll call.
I had a point of order.
There's two people speaking. I can't hear both of you at the same time.
I have a point of order, Madam Chair.
And your point of order.
We do not need to vote to close public comment. We can leave it open until the end of the meeting. And if we are able to hear from Mr. Brandon prior to the end of the meeting,
Let me check with the clerk. Mr. Clerk, my colleague believes that we do not have to close public comment. We can leave it open should Mr. Brandon be able to unmute himself or, get beyond his technical impediments. Would you concur?
Yeah, you're not, excuse me, you don't have to close public comment.
Very good. Did we have to vote not to do that?
No.
Okay, very good. Councilor Toomey, if you do not have any strong exception, we will just go back to the meeting.
Madam Chair, what I have an objection to is that we're not following proper procedure. When we're in the middle of a roll call, there is no interruption. And I've noticed that more and more, that when we're in a roll call, people are interrupting that roll call. And that is not, I believe, is against the rules of the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Toomey.
Madam Chair.
I'll be mindful of that. I would like to, at this point, use our time wisely. And I will give the floor back to you, Councilor Zondervan, but only to continue the conversation. But let me just say this before you do that, sir. We are coming upon at the time that this meeting will expire, which is 1:45. So I would like to get through this document the best we can, after which I will entertain your email comments, which I will send back to you, and we will discuss at the next meeting, which I will endeavor to plan very soon to pick up this so we can keep this process going forward. Councilor Zondervan, you may resume the floor, after which I want to hear from any other councilor that'd like to speak on this. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I did want to note that a point of order is.
Councilor Zondervan, I encourage you to keep your voice up, please.
Thank you. I was saying that a point of order was in order at that moment.
Councilor Zondervan, I respectfully ask you not to do that. Stay on topic, please.
I wanted to go back to the screening committee paragraph in phase 1, and so the composition of which shall be determined by, and so my comment is that should be determined by the City Council, not the Government Operations Committee. And I don't understand why the purchasing department would be involved in that.
Okay, I'll answer it, and then if the city solicitor wants to chime in, she can. The Government Operations Committee in the past has been the committee through which the city manager search process has gone through. It has not been a function of the entire City Council, and that is why it says Government Operations Committee, which is how I would respectfully like to leave it, because it gets very difficult to get the entire council together when it's not a already prescribed meeting like the first Monday of every week, every Monday, which is our council meetings. That's number one. The purchasing department, again, this piece was extrapolated from an earlier process. And so that is why it is there. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, I certainly understand that we don't want to have these lengthy discussions in the City Council, but in terms of the composition of the screening committee, which is really an appointment or a final vote on who is on that committee, it would make sense to me that the City Council as a whole would vote on that. Certainly the Government Operations Committee could have discussions about individual persons to be appointed to it, but when the final vote is taken on this will be the screening committee, I would think that should be up to the City Council as a whole. And then I guess, I don't know if you meant for Solicitor Gloa to respond on the purchasing department, because I don't understand
that. Through you, Madam Chair, I do not think that the purchasing department needs to be involved at that point. I don't think that that has been done in the past in the procedures that I've been aware of, and I can also let Ms. Unger chime in if she wants to on that issue. With respect to the full City Council, the only thing I would caution is that anything that the council does has to be fully in public. So at some point, you know, if you wanted to have the full council select the members of the council who would be on the screening committee, that would be done in a fully public forum. Once the screening committee has been composed, those members cannot report back to or discuss the screening committee process with other members of the council that would constitute a quorum or more without all of those communications being subject to the open meeting law. And I agree with what Mr. Lynch said, that there could be concerns about, first there could be open meeting law concerns, but secondly, if you are discussing qualifications of applicants at a very early stage in the process, you could you know, chill their interest in applying for the position, because many people applying for high-level positions who are already in high-level positions do not wish to have their application interest known unless they are at a further stage in the process. So that's why I think that the council should be thoughtful in at what stage you want to stop having full council participation in public and then sort of have the smaller group proceed on behalf of the council.
Thank you, Ms. Glover. Are there any other questions? I see Councilor McGovern. Are you poised to ask a question? Councilor McGovern, I'm going to give the floor to you.
Yes, I'm just saying I have to leave. I've got to get my son to a doctor's appointment. I'm going to be late already. So if I have any questions about the other phases of your document, I will email you and the committee with that information, but I got to cut out right now, so I apologize.
Councilor McGovern, I appreciate your time. Thank you for staying as long as you have, and I will be looking for any questions or comments that you have by email. Please send them through the clerk, and the clerk will then forward them to me. Thank you so much. Are there any other, Councilor Zondria, I know I've heard from you, but I want to have you yield to see if there are other members that had questions. Are there any members of the Government Operations Committee that have a question? Before I go to Councilor Nolan, Ms. Glover, Solicitor Glover, do you have a question or comment you want, because your hand is up, that you want to bring to the floor?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to bring to the attention of the committee that in the last process, Councilor Marr, who was the chair of the Government Operations Committee and headed up the overall process, and the personnel director, Sheila Kitty Rawson, made the selection for who would be on the screening committee. I do think that part of the screening process is shepherded along by the personnel department, because this is hiring an employee, although it's an appointment of the city council. There are certain provisions of either city policy or law that need to be followed. So we have historically had the personnel director involved in the mechanics and process of that. So as I said last time, the screening committee was selected by the members of the Government Operations Committee who are part of the screening committee were selected by Councillor Marr and Sheila Keaty-Rawson.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there anyone from the committee want to be heard before I go to Councillor Nolan? Hearing none. Councillor Nolan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Simmons, for allowing me to speak, not as a member of the committee. I just wanted to comment that as someone who is not on the Government Ops Committee, I really do hope that it's the entire council that's involved in appointing the screening committee. It's basically the most important job we have. It is something the entire council can do. I know even if we can't be on, all of us can't be on the screening committee, it would be limited to 4 members. Certainly, my experience on school committee was that we were definitely benefited from having a range of voices and people at the table to go through lists of recommended people for the interview committee for searches. And I would think we'd be missing an opportunity to involve the whole council in literally the most important job we have. I know that you, Councillor Simmons, are pushing us, which is great, to make sure that we start this process. I just really hope that instead of only government ops, that members like myself are as included as any other member. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like the process is treating all the councilors equally, and yet we're all obviously equal in terms of needing to be part of the appointing body.
Thank you for your comments, Councilor. This has been a vigorous conversation. I've enjoyed it immensely. It does speak to the fact that there's much work to do, and we have to be diligent and very focused upon doing that. I would like to conclude this meeting at this time by urging my colleagues, members in particular, to review the document, send those comments, those that they might have. Today's Tuesday. It'd be most helpful if they could get these comments to the clerk and then through the clerk to me, so that I could work on them to send them back to the Government Ops Committee members, in particular larger committee as well, so that we can continue to have this process go forward. Again, this has been an extraordinary conversation, very informative. My colleagues have asked very important questions, and those will all be taken into consideration. Having said that, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Again, reminding my colleague members of the Government Ops Committee to forward any questions, but I'm open to any of my colleagues with anything that they might want to add. Having said that, on a motion by Councilor Toomey to adjourn, Mr. Chair, please call the roll.
On that motion, Councilor McGovern, absent. Councilor Serena Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Toomey. Councilor Toomey. Absent. Councilor Zondrian.
Yes.
Yes. Councilor Simmons.
Yes.
Motion passes 3 in favor, 2 absent.
Thank you very much for your time and attention. Have a good day. Bye-bye.